Alright, so hey everyone, today I want to take a look at the dead zones for Rayman Legends. This game has two dead zone types. One is for your general land movement, and the other one is for swimming. So for this land movement type, you have to move the stick horizontally 70% before you begin moving. 70% is a colossal dead zone size. But what makes it not much of an issue here is that, as you can see, passing straight over the dead zone and then pushing the stick fully doesn't have a change in speed gradient, so you don't have to worry about throttling it. So there's no point in not pushing the stick fully, which kind of mitigates the size of the dead zone. You can see the vertical portion, these vertical thresholds. For the lower one, you can see that this activates the crouch animation, and intuitively, once you have that triggered and press the attack button, you do a ground slam, whereas normally you would just do a horizontal attack. This works a little different for upwards attacks, where you can see that the animation doesn't trigger until you pass into this threshold with the dotted markings. But unlike the downward attack, if you attack now, you can still see that you're attacking horizontally, even though the animation's triggered. You have to push the stick further past this threshold to be able to attack upwards. This threshold is straight on the graph, but it does go off the graph and goes off diagonally in a similar shape to this dotted threshold. What's interesting though is when you jump and you're under this threshold, you just do normal horizontal attacks, and of course when you're below this for the down one, it's consistent in that you attack downward. But for upward attacks, the threshold actually becomes consistent with the down threshold. So there's some extra effort that went into adding these additional thresholds while grounded. That seemed like a bit of extra effort, but of course during gameplay isn't really noticeable, since you'll probably be pegging the stick fully anyway when doing those attacks. The last little quirk for this dead zone is when you're standing and you attack, you just do standing horizontal attacks. When you're moving, you do horizontal attacks, but you preserve your momentum. But when you move the stick past the vertical threshold, you can see that it cuts off your momentum, and if you attack continuously, you just completely stop. This is kind of reminiscent of how Rayman Origins worked, and it's not clear why this is preserved here. This isn't really noticeable given how small this threshold is for that. You would think that, you know, if you move up to this vertical threshold, you maybe could walk and then attack upwards. There's absolutely no benefit in doing that, but there's not much of a benefit in stopping you dead once you're moving either. So that's just a little quirk, but that finishes the this portion, this type of dead zone. Alright, so this is the water dead zone. This shares the same 70% size, but now it's a full square because you can move in any direction. You will see this threshold beneath the marked dead zone. This triggers the animation for swimming, but it doesn't actually move you until you break out of the square. Now the size matters a little more in this case, because you'll be able to see that moving right past the dead zone moves you this fast, and if you push it fully, you gain a tiny speed boost. So if you want to throttle that, the large dead zone can make it more difficult to do so. You can see that the corners of the dead zone almost reach the edge of this graph, and that's a danger for any kind of axial dead zone, because while you see my stick comfortably moves well beyond that in the diagonal regions, some players' sticks may not, and when you have axial dead zones this large, you run the risk of players not being able to access those thresholds. It shouldn't be an issue, for most players, but that is something you run the risk of. There's restricted diagonal movement around the axes, so if your stick is anywhere within this blue region right here, you're moving perfectly right, perfectly left, perfectly up, and perfectly down. You have to move into these green regions before you start seeing diagonal movement occur. And this can be a little awkward if you're trying to make subtle adjustments horizontally or perfectly vertically. If you're trying to, say, trace this chain, it's pretty easy because this whole range is diagonal movement, so you're able to make those subtle adjustments. But if you're moving vertically, you do have this dead zone that you have to pass before making those kinds of adjustments. This game doesn't require much precision, but full diagonal movement would be nice to have. The attacking has no threshold. You can just attack normally, and you attack the same in any direction you move in. And of course, when running, same thing. So that covers the dead zones for this game. I do want to use this as an example for a way you can use an anti-deadzone to counter some of the game's dead zones, since this has a pretty unique shape for the swimming. So if you wanted to counter a dead zone like this, you'd want to get rid of these restricted diagonal regions so that you could have full diagonal movement. And you could do this by using a 25% anti-square dead zone, and that would counter 25% of the full dead zone. But of course, there's still a decent amount of dead zone remaining, and you could use a 60% anti-circular dead zone to counter the remaining range, and that will actually counter this rounded square region. So to demonstrate that, I'm going to change the graph and run that. So the darker node is your default stick movement, and the clear node is what's being output to the game. So I've established a 20% circular dead zone, and once I break out of that, the game's dead zone is countered. So if I trace this, you can see that, well, actually it's partially countered. It's tracing the inner threshold, which, as we showed, doesn't actually move you. But if you're moving here, you can see that the restricted diagonal regions are being countered. So now you get diagonal movement right around the axes. So if we do, I'll demonstrate that in just a little bit. But we also want to counter the dead zone fully. So as you can see, that I still have to move the stick pretty dramatically to be able to see movement occur diagonally, and that's a little awkward. And I've created a variable called diagonal scale, which originally was used for addressing the clover-shaped dead zones in the Crash Insane trilogy, but it actually works the other way too, where you can push out diagonal movement to counter square shapes like this. So by doing that, I'll switch the value to counter outwardly diagonally. So now when you move out here, you can see that if I trace a circle, it's going to output a square now. So now whenever I move outside of this circular dead zone, it counters the game's dead zone. So we functionally turn this kind of square dead zone with restricted diagonal movement into functionally a circular dead zone with full diagonal movement. So if I trace this, you can see that it's not only tracing a square, but you can see that there's a smooth gradient of full diagonal movement. Of course, this affects the land dead zone a little bit. So if we change back to the land dead zone, you can see the dead zone has become smaller now because of the changes. But with the anti-square dead zone, you actually cut off a bit of the threshold for attacking upwardly. But of course, this threshold was quite large to begin with, so you could still have a large range to be able to access vertical attacks. And of course, when jumping, you have a wider range than you did before, and you can see that it's actually negligibly different, seeing as they meet up at those sections. But anyway, that about covers things. So those are the two dead zones that Rayman Legends uses, and a way that you can counter the water dead zone effectively. So thanks for watching, and everyone, have a good rest of your day.